Hello everybody, my name is Federico Veneri, and today I'm going to be presenting about synthetic anchoring for the specific source problem, which is a joint work with Danica Omen. So before starting, I would like to acknowledge some funding that I got from CSAFE, which actually allowed me to go through my PhD and complete this dissertation and of course this research. So let me begin by providing you with some introduction to statistics in forensic science. In criminal cases, forensic experts are asked to examine the evidence and present the finding to judges and jurors who are going to make the ultimate decision regarding the guilt or innocence of a person. And there are some professional guidelines that actually tell you that you should present the findings using sound statistical foundations and a probabilistic framework such that you provide some uncertainty communications. One of the primary tasks faced by experts are source attribution problems. And if you're not familiar with this, I have an example for you. So let's suppose that you're a crime scene investigator and there was a shootout. They call you to the scene and you go and recover some bullets. So after some investigation, a person of interest was found and they are able to get a gun. When they get a gun, they do some test shots into a tank and they have some control items. And in essence, this is an inference problem because we are going to have two hypotheses that we are trying to combine and compare. Traditional tests are called the prosecutor and the defense, and the prosecutor is saying, well, you know what? The POI's gun also generated the control and the recovered item. So the crime is a match. Actually, he could be guilty. The defense is going to say the opposite, that the POI gun, well, it generated the recovered item, sorry, the control items, but the recovered ones, that's a different gun. So the person is not guilty, it doesn't have anything to do with the crime. So, we're statisticians, we would really like to do some likelihood ratio-based inference, some of our tools that we learned from Stats 101. The thing is that your data might look like this. So, on top of having like a more complex statements, a more complex hypothesis, your data is highly complex, so trying to provide a probabilistic model for the features and use likelihood ratios is extremely hard. One thing that you can do, because we are really lucky, is because statisticians have explored the use of machine learning scores as a likelihood ratio-based approach, which actually is likelihood-free. So we can construct propositions using machine learning scores that we can develop. And the idea is now that we are going to be focusing on scores denoted by delta, and the idea is that rather than focusing on the features themselves, we are going to make a comparison between two feature vectors, two images, two items, and there are a score. And once we get the scores, well, we can study the conditional densities under both propositions. When we get a new value, we can just plug them in and make a decision. The interpretation is the same one as in likelihood ratio, but now you have to train the model, you have to do a lot more estimation, you have a lot more work to do. However, the data is quite limited. And here I'm providing just an example of how things look in practice. You may have a recovered item, and you may be able to generate control items. Let's say that you're able to generate 3 of them. And you may have some data available in your lab, so you can generate a reference population. And now the next steps in making comparisons. So in the plot I'm showing you here, you have these little arches, which are the comparisons that you're making between items or the scores that you are getting. And one of the things that you can see, and actually probably is really troubling you, you're using data multiple times. So for instance, the one that you have on top there to the left, well, you're using each comparison between the control items to generate learning instances of how things behave, and then using the same items again to generate reference population. Sorry, generate scores using the reference population. So our favorite assumption about independence probably is not working there, and the models begin to downgrade. And we are worried about that. So we are going to propose a solution in order to generate data that actually is going to help us out use score likelihood ratio with this type of inference problem. So our proposed approach is called synthetic anchoring, and the idea is in 2 steps. The first thing we are going to do is going to create synthetic items, and actually we are using an algorithm that actually is pretty standard in classification problem, which is called smooth, the same idea basically. And the key component in the original algorithm is using linear interpolation in order to create between instances, new instances from the original data. Our approach is really similar, but rather than using the original data, we are going to create items, and I'm going to show you how that works in a bit. After we generate these new learning instances, what we are going to do, we are going to emulate how the data should be generated in this inference problem, and then we are going to create these new sets P and D that can be used for estimation purposes. So in the poster session, I'm able to show you how the algorithm works step by step, but today I'm just going to show you a really simple example of how the data looks like and how you can actually interpolate in order to generate learning instances for your algorithm. So on the picture to the left, you have a couple of densities. And this type of inference I'm going to show you, well, I'm trying to figure out if you have a new data point, where does that point come from, for what particular density? And let's say that you're focusing on the green one, meaning that's the specific source or the GAN that you were worried about. So in the approach that I show you, the original one that researchers are using is creating all Paris comparison, and you end up with this type of figure that you have on the left, sorry, on your right actually, where you have all potential Paris comparison done between the specific source, and then you go to reference population and create new comparisons that you're going to use to train your algorithms. Again, the issue with this is a lot of dependence being built in, and your models begin to downgrade. We don't want that. One approach that we're proposing is, well, rather than working with the raw data, let's try to generate new data. And the idea is that you're going to grab a couple of items for the feature space. We're going to interpolate between the two of them, and we're going to generate new data. That's what you have on the C panel. On the D panel is the output of the whole algorithms, rather than using the original data that was noted by the dots. Now we have these little triangles that represent the synthetic data that we can use to train our SLRs and make some conclusions. So this is just a general overview. In our work, we go a bit more deep because we showed that in simulation studies, actually using this approach, when you know the true DGP, well, actually both methods go along really work really nicely. So basically, knowing the data generating process, being able to generate more and more data is really similar to using a synthetic approach. We have two applications in forensics, one in glass and another in handwriting. And the one in handwriting is the one that I'm going to be talking a bit more today to show you how it works. So a motivating example of why this is important. Well, a handwriting threatening note was sent to a statistician professor, and a happy student actually did not pass Stats 101. You know, teaching statistics is a really hard profession. And we are suspecting that he was the POI. A collection of his handwriting notes were collected and compared. So we have an inference question that is, did the writer actually wrote these handwriting notes? May he be guilty? Let's try to figure that out. So we have some data. Now, as you know, handwriting data looks like in the picture to the left, highly complex, trying to propose a model for that so we can use likelihood ratios. But we are able to use some decomposition technique in order to generate features from the data. And I can talk more about that if you're interested during the poster session. So more details about this application. What we did, well, we're going to generate scenarios where the prosecutor is correct and where the defense is correct, and we're trying to figure out if we're making the correct inference. And one of the things I'm going to be comparing today is the performance of two resampling techniques, naive, which is the one that researchers are doing currently in practice, a fixed split approach, which is another alternative proposed in the literature, another approach, which is synthetic anchoring to solve this issue. So here are the results. But you have here, in the x-axis is the log10 SLR, which is the output of the score likelihood ratio models. And on the y-axis, if you are dealing with a match or a close non-match, meaning the prosecutor or the defense. So the solid line there actually provides you with the threshold when you are making a decision. If you're on the left, well, you're leaning toward the defense. If you're on the right, you're leaning toward the prosecutor. And you can see that for the different methods, it seems that our method is actually in the correct side of things. So we are on the left side when you're dealing with the closest not match, the defense, on the right side when you're dealing with the matches. But if you want to put some numbers to that, well, you can use, for instance, the CLLR, which is a specific thing for score likelihood ratios. And actually, we are finding that our synthetic approach is providing an error rate which is significantly lower than the other two methods that are actually present in the literature. One of the things that we found is that, well, our SLRs are more conservative. That means that we are closer to the threshold. We are not providing like huge values of evidence, but at least we are on the correct side of things, which actually is super important for criminal justice. So in conclusion, we have better performance, we are more conservative, but actually that's really not a bad thing. And just to wrap up, SLRs are proposed as a way for evaluating complex evidence, which is really interesting in forensic science. But the current approach relies on pairing items and creating dependent structure that actually downgrade the model performance. But now in our approach, we are providing a new way of how to generate data in order to train our models and actually get better results. So in our simulation studies, as I mentioned, we showed that when you have well-known DGPs, well, things tend to match. So the inference that you're drawing for likelihood ratios and score likelihood ratios, well, they tend to be on the same path. And the other thing is that we provide some applications in handwriting, forensic analysis, and also in glass, and our approach seems to be outperforming the traditional methods. Of course, I have really few minutes left. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm available for questions during the poster session. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Federico. We have time for one question.
Hello. Hi, I'm Chris Miller. So this seems interesting, and I've read there's a body of literature that's about this kind of issue. This looked kind of like functional data analysis, and there's also larger areas of like metric statistics analysis that don't need to use any sort of machine learning in order to be able to answer these kinds of questions, where they would just use like a metric defined on this space in order to be able to do some sort of hypothesis testing. I'm not sure if that was one of the methods you were comparing against, but do you have any thoughts on like how this other literature like relates to this, so that we don't necessarily have to do machine learning?
No, that's completely fine. I think that this comes from a likelihood perspective, in the sense that, okay, we observe some scores, you observe some features. Which proposition is more likely? That's the type of inference that is driving behind the scenes. And score likelihood ratio actually is another way of doing that. And this approach provides you with the tools that you need to solve this particular specific source problem. The thing that you're mentioning, I think they are really nice tools, but one of the problems that practitioners are facing is that you don't really have enough data. Because when you're trying to solve like probabilistics, handwriting or something like that, probably you have like at most 10 data points, and then you're trying to make inference from that. And I think that functional data analysis, for instance, will require a bit more data in order to be useful, probably. But it's really interesting to see if we can try to test them in the future, see how different approaches work. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Thank you.